AI. It's everywhere these days, isn't it? Or at least that's what it feels like.
It certainly dominates the headlines.
Yeah, and it's easy to get swept up in all the hype. Killer robots, sentient computers.
Hollywood certainly hasn't helped.
Right. But while those sci-fi scenarios are good for a thriller movie, the reality of AI is a lot more nuanced, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. It's less about sentient machines taking over the world and more about the strategic decisions being made today that will shape how AI is developed and deployed in the future.
And that's exactly what we're diving into today. We've got two really interesting reports in front of us.
Yeah, the UK's Defense Artificial Intelligence Strategy and a Politico report on sovereign AI ecosystems, both really relevant to this whole discussion.
Definitely. And they both kind of go hand in hand when you really start to look at them. I mean, one focuses on the UK's strategic approach to AI, particularly in defense.
And the other kind of zooms out and looks at the global landscape, the whole data governance side of things.
Right, exactly. How these things all intersect. So should we just jump right in?
Let's do it.
Okay, so the UK report really struck me right out of the gate because it addresses the elephant in the room, the whole AI as an existential threat thing.
Yeah, it's there, front and center, doesn't shy away from it at all.
Right, like it even lays out some pretty stark scenarios. AI-controlled drone swarms, sophisticated cyber attacks, the whole 9 yards.
But then it takes this really interesting turn, I think. It kind of flips the script.
Yeah, like almost a, well, if you can't beat 'em, join 'em kind of approach.
Exactly.
Wow.
It argues that since AI is already so deeply embedded in our lives.
I mean, think about it. Smartphones, personalized recommendations.
Exactly. It's everywhere. So the report argues that instead of fearing AI, nations should be actively shaping its development, using it to their advantage.
And more specifically, to safeguard their security and values.
Right. It's about leveraging AI strategically, both defensively and offensively.
And the UK is really putting its money where its mouth is. I mean, they were the first to actually use AI in a military operation.
Yeah, back in 2021.
So this isn't some theoretical future we're talking about. It's happening now.
It's very much a reality.
And that's where the Politico report comes in. Because it kind of picks up on this thread of data being the lifeblood of AI.
The fuel that powers the entire revolution.
Because you can have the most sophisticated algorithms in the world, but if you don't have the data to train them, to make them smarter.
They're basically useless.
Exactly. And that's where things get really interesting, I think. Because the Politico report talks about how the global distribution of data centers, those massive server farms.
The physical infrastructure of the digital world.
Right. Like how that's actually shifting the balance of power in the world.
Because for a long time, it was all about Silicon Valley,
Yeah.
right? They had all the data centers, all the processing power.
Right. But this report is saying that's changing.
Rapidly. You see regions like Europe and Asia investing heavily in their own data center infrastructure.
It's like a digital arms race almost.
In a way, it is. And the weapon is data. Whoever controls the data controls the future of AI.
And that brings us to this whole concept of data sovereignty, which the Politico report really dives into.
It's a big one. And it's becoming increasingly important, especially in the context of AI.
But it's kind of a slippery concept,
Yeah, it's one of those terms that gets thrown around a lot. But what does it actually mean in practice?
All right. So in a nutshell, how would you explain data sovereignty?
Basically, it's a nation's right to control the data generated within its borders. So any data created, stored, or processed in a particular country is subject to the laws and regulations of that country.
So like a digital border almost.
Kind of. It's more nuanced than that, but you get the idea. Each country gets to set its own rules about how data is handled.
Which makes sense on the surface. But then the Politico report points out that all these different approaches,
They create a very complex landscape, a real mishmash of regulations and laws.
yeah, like a patchwork quilt.
Exactly. And navigating that patchwork can be incredibly challenging, especially for businesses operating internationally.
Because you've got the EU with GDPR, China with its cybersecurity law, the US with the Cloud Act.
It's a lot to keep track of. And then you have countries like Saudi Arabia.
Oh, yeah, they really stand out in the report.
They do. They've implemented incredibly strict data localization requirements. Basically, any data generated within their borders has to stay there.
So they're not messing around.
Nope. And it's a trend we're seeing more and more of. Governments are realizing just how valuable data is.
especially in the age of AI. It's the new oil, as they say.
And just like with oil, control over data is becoming a major geopolitical factor.
It's all about power, influence, and who gets to shape the future of this technology.
Precisely. And that's what makes this whole discussion so fascinating. Because it's not just about the technology itself, but of the broader implications for society, for geopolitics, for the future of humanity, really.
Absolutely. And it's something that we all need to be more aware of.
I completely agree. Because the choices we make today about how we govern and utilize data will have a profound impact on the world we create tomorrow.
We've talked about how the UK and other nations are approaching AI strategically, but these reports we've got, they get into the nitty-gritty, like, how do you actually become AI ready? What does that even mean?
It's a question a lot of countries are grappling with right now. And the UK report, it actually lays out some concrete steps, like they're talking about creating a defense AI skills framework. Basically, this whole system for like building up the workforce, making sure people have the skills to actually thrive in this, AI-driven world.
So it's recognizing that it's not just about having the best algorithms. You need people who can actually use them, right? Understand them, build on them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's about having a society that's not intimidated by this technology, but empowered by it.
And that takes training, education, investment.
Absolutely. And speaking of investment, let's not forget about the physical infrastructure. I mean, the Politico report really emphasized those data centers, right?
Those massive server farms, the engine behind it all.
Yeah, they're like the power plants of the digital age. And get that the report projects that the global data center market is going to be worth something like $200 billion by 2025.
$200 billion. Wow, that's a clear sign of where things are headed.
It shows you how fast this whole thing is accelerating. And it's not just about, who can create the most advanced AI. It's about who can build the infrastructure to support it.
It's almost like back in the day, the California gold rush, right?
Exactly.
At this time, the data centers, they're the picks and shovels.
I like that analogy. It's about the tools.
And right now, a lot of those tools, they're concentrated in the U.S. The report said like 40% of the world's hyperscale data centers, U.S.
Yeah, but here's the thing. That dominance, it's not guaranteed to last.
Things are shifting.
Big time. Europe, Asia, they're pouring money into their own data center infrastructure. Like, Ireland's become a huge hub.
Because of the climate, right?
Yeah.
It's better for cooling those giant server farms.
Partly, yeah. And the tax breaks don't hurt either. But the point is, countries are realizing that data, it's the new oil.
Got to control the reserves.
And just like with oil, whoever controls those data reserves, they wield a lot of power. Geopolitical power, economic power.
It affects everything.
It really does. National security, innovation, even just like everyday life.
So we're talking about, it's not just the algorithms themselves, it's this whole ecosystem. Data, infrastructure, talent.
It's all connected, intertwined. And that's where this AI sovereignty idea, it really comes into focus. Because it's not just about protecting your own data, it's about being self-sufficient.
Building your own AI ecosystem that can compete.
Exactly. You don't want to be dependent on other countries, especially when it comes to something as transformative as AI.
It's like you want to be in the driver's seat, right? Not just along for the ride.
Exactly. And this actually leads to another really interesting point that the UK report brings up, human-machine teaming.
Okay, so we've got data centers, skills frameworks, and now humans teaming up with machines. This is getting pretty futuristic.
It sounds like something out of a movie, doesn't it? But it's more real than you might think. The UK report, they specifically talk about this in the context of defense. Imagine AI systems that can sift through mountains of intelligence data.
Like way faster than any human could.
Exactly. So they can analyze patterns, flag potential threats, all that. And that frees up human analysts to focus on, the bigger picture, making strategic decisions.
So it's not about replacing human intelligence. It's about making it better.
Augmenting it. Exactly. Let the AI handle the things that computers are good at, those massive data crunching tasks. And then humans, they can do what they do best.
The critical thinking, the creativity.
Right. You want that human element in the loop.
Yeah.
And the report, it actually envisions this future where you have soldiers working directly with AI systems.
Side by side.
Yeah. Each one complementing the other.
It's kind of a wild thought when you really think about it. But it makes you wonder, like, how do you make sure those lines of communication are clear? How do you build trust when you're talking about, potentially life or death situations?
Those are the million-dollar questions.
Yeah.
And the report acknowledges that. They emphasize the importance of trust, transparency, especially when you're talking about defense, It's high stakes.
Yeah, it's not like you can just hit undo if something goes wrong.
Exactly. So you need to build those safeguards in from the beginning. And I think what's interesting here is it seems like we're moving away from this idea AI is something separate from us. Like the robots are coming to take our jobs.
Right.
It's more about integration.
Like AI is becoming part of the fabric of how we live, how we work.
Exactly. And that's only going to accelerate. I mean, it's not slowing down.
So where does that leave, the average person? How do you prepare for a future where AI is just kind of woven into everything?
That's the big question, isn't it? Now, we talked about AI literacy, the skills gap, but honestly, I think it's even bigger than that.
Figure how?
It's about mindset. We have to get comfortable with this idea of constant learning because the skills that are valuable today, they might not be tomorrow.
It's like the goalposts keep moving.
Exactly. You have to be adaptable, embrace the change, be okay with not having all the answers.
So it's not just about learning a specific skill. It's about being a lifelong learner.
Exactly. Be curious. Be willing to experiment because this is a journey we're all on. It's not just governments. It's not just tech companies. It's all of us.
It's like we're constantly playing catch up with the future, right?
It can feel that way for sure.
Yeah.
But it's also exciting. We're talking about a fundamental shift in how we live, how we work, how we even think about the world.
And the decisions we make today, they're going to have huge ripple effects. I mean, we're talking about shaping the future, really.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's both a huge responsibility and incredible opportunity. We have the chance to steer this technology in a direction that benefits all of humanity.
To use AI for good, essentially.
Right. Exactly. To solve problems that have plagued us for generations, to create a more just, equitable, and sustainable world. I mean, that's the dream, right?
It is. But those dreams, they can easily turn into nightmares if we're not careful. And both of these reports, they make that very clear.
It's not a given that AI is going to be a force for good. It all comes down to the choices we make, the guardrails we put in place.
And it's got to be a collaborative effort. It can't just be like a handful of tech companies or governments calling the shots.
Absolutely not. This is bigger than any one country, any one company. We need everyone at the table, policymakers, researchers, ethicists, the public.
Because the future of AI, it's not something that's being done to us. It's something we're all creating, whether we realize it or not.
Every day, with every click, every purchase, every interaction we have online, we're feeding this massive machine. And it's learning from us.
That's a bit of a sobering thought, isn't it?
It can be, but it's also empowering because it means we have agency, we have a voice.
We're not just along for the ride.
Exactly. We're
Right.
not passive bystanders in this revolution. We're active participants.
So what can people do? I mean, where do you even begin to wrap your head around all of this, let alone try to shape it?
It's a great question.
Yeah.
And I don't think there's any one right answer. But I think it starts with awareness, educating yourself about these issues.
So read these reports.
Yeah, they're a great starting point. But also engage in those conversations that are happening. The ethical debates, the policy discussions, because those conversations, they're happening right now, whether we're a part of them or not.
And the more voices we have in those conversations, the more likely we are to create a future that reflects our values.
Precisely. Because ultimately AI, it's a mirror. It reflects back to us our own hopes, our own fears, our own biases.
It's a tool. And like any tool, it can be used for good or for bad. It all depends on the hands that wield it.
That's a powerful way to put it.
So, to our listeners out there, stay curious, stay informed, and most importantly, stay engaged. The future of AI, it's not written in stone. It's being written right now by all of us.
And that's a story we all have the power to shape.
Absolutely. Well, that's about all the time we have for today's deep dive. Thanks for joining us.
It's been a pleasure.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.